This is everything you're going to need to put wheel spacers on your R53 Mini. Of course, you're going to need 4 wheel spacers. You're going to need longer bolts, some 200 grit sandpaper just to lightly clean the back of the wheels and the surface of the brake rotors, because you want a nice clean mating surface for the wheel spacer, a torque wrench for when you're all done, and then a regular socket wrench, a short extension, and a 17mm nut to get everything off. As you can see, here's our stock bolt. It has a 25mm shank, so however much longer you need is how wide your wheel spacers are. So this is 25mm. We have a 20mm spacer, so we're going to need a 45mm nut, which is what we have here. So there's a 45mm shank. So we will have the same exact number of threads going into the hub as we would before. It's just 20mm of that height is going to be taken up by the new wheel spacer. So of course we have 16 of these. We got 4 spacers. I already did the passenger side of a car, so we're going to do the driver's side real quick. And then we will compare the two to see what they look like and see what the final product looks like. Here's a view of the driver's side rear without any sort of wheel spacer on. So you can see we still have quite a bit of tuck under the wheel well right there. And of course that's not helped by the excessive amount of rear camber these cars have. And here's a shot looking straight down the driver's side front tire. Again, we still have a good amount underneath the wheel well. Looking at the car off to the side, you really can't tell how far in or out the wheels are. I think it looks perfectly fine, but of course we can always do a little bit, especially considering how cheap wheel spacers are. Here we are looking at the passenger side now that we have already installed the spacers. Again, I don't really think it has changed the look of the car. You can mostly see it from the front or the rear, but from the sides there's really not much of a difference. Here's a view of the rear of the car with the spacers on. So you can see the top of the wheel is still tucked under the wheel arch. Mostly that's because the R53 Mini has a lot of visible negative camber in the rear. Though I don't like it, this is considered factory and an acceptable amount of negative camber. However, I might get adjustable arms to tuck that wheel in a little bit so that it's a little bit more vertical. And here's a view from the front. So the front looks a lot better, not nearly as much negative camber, only a little bit. The wheel is still inside the top of that arch, but honestly, if it was me and I could do it again, I would probably go with the 15mm spacers instead of 20. I think 20 is just a little bit too aggressive, but we'll see it. I'll drive it like this for a while and see how I like it. Taking a bit of a step back and looking at it in front and front, I do think it's a little bit too wide. I think it's just a tiny bit too much. I think it'll look a lot better once the car is lowered a little bit and with a better looking sidewall. I just don't really like these all-season tires, so once we get the Federals on there, I think it'll look a lot better. So before putting the wheel spacer on, you can see we have just a little bit of surface rust here, but we need to smooth off so that it's not interfering with any of the mating of the two surfaces. So we've got some 200 grit sandpaper. We're just going to lightly scuff it off, and then we'll be able to put the wheel spacer on. It doesn't take much for all that surface corrosion to come right off. Now, one of the important things about these wheel spacers is these are hub-centric, which means it has this little hub right here, which is going to seat inside the wheel, and then it has a little area here for the factory hub to seat onto. So when I place this on, it's going to seat. I don't have any up and down, left or right movement. It's a nice solid fit. So we just have to line up all of the holes, and then we should be able to hang the wheel on here, and it's going to sit on this little lip right here, and that is what's going to center the wheel to make sure that everything is centered, and when it's spinning, you're not going to have any sort of weird wobble in the wheel. So it is very important if you're doing spacers, make sure you get a hub-centric spacer that matches the center bore of your wheel, whatever that might be. So there's different center bores, so find a center bore for your car and for your wheel, and you can even get what are called hub-centric rings. So let's say you have the factory center bore here, but your aftermarket wheel has a bigger bore. A hub-centric ring will take up the space between this hub and the hub on the wheel and make sure that the wheel is nice and centered before you put any of the bolts in. Now, this conical seat on the bolt is going to center the wheel because it's going to make sure that the hole lines up perfectly with this seat. So the bolts will center the wheel, but that is not the way you want to do it. That's not what you want to rely on. You want this to be your backup measure. You want your primary way of centering the wheel to be this hub. So now that we've got the wheel on, of course you want to hand start all of your bolts, and you want to tighten them in a crisscross pattern, and then we're going to torque everything down to 90 foot-pounds. Take the car on a drive afterwards, make sure that everything is okay. You don't want to have any weird wobbles or any issues, and then when you get back, check the torque again. I'm also going to check it 1 week later, so just make sure that all of the torque specs are where they should be. Everything is nice and seated flat, because you don't want any issues with your wheel. You don't want to wobble. It's going to cause tire wear. It's going to cause an uncomfortable driving experience, and it might cause one of your bolts to break and cause the wheel to come off. So just make sure you keep an eye on your torque specs, check them periodically for the first couple weeks just to make sure everything's where it should be. But other than that, installing wheel spacers is extremely easy. It's a good way to add a little bit more of aggressive look to your car without too many negatives. Really, the only negative being the added weight. A lot of people don't like wheel spacers because they think they're unsafe, but as long as you buy a quality wheel spacer that is built to very high tolerances, you're not going to run into any issues. Of course, it's a good idea to check your alignment because any sort of issues could arise or be exaggerated by the wheel being further out. But let's get this wheel torqued up. We'll go ahead and do the driver's side front wheel, get it on the ground, and we'll see what the car looks like. All right, so I do think the car looks pretty good. I definitely like having the chrome wheel bolts instead of the black ones. I think they blend into the wheels a little bit better. I wish someone would make a matte silver wheel bolt, but no one seems to do that. Everything is black oxide or chrome. As I said before, I do think I would go with a 15mm spacer instead of a 20mm spacer if I could do it again and everything was free. But I'm gonna stick with these 20mm spacers for a while and see how I like them and see if they grow on me a little bit. Of course, I'm gonna check my alignment, just make sure everything looks good and drive it around for a while, see how it goes. Like I said, you can never check your torque specs too many times. Just keep an eye on it, make sure everything is nice and seated properly. Of course, this was a super easy modification. It only took me about 30 minutes to do the whole car, and that was with filming and moving the camera around. But this would be a great modification to pair with a time that you're going to be rotating your wheels or doing your brakes or suspension or some other modification where you have to take the wheels off anyway. That'll save you some time, and this won't add any time to that modification. If you guys have any questions, of course, feel free to drop those below. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next week.